Welcome to Session 4, Creation Apologetics. I'm so glad that you're here. My name is Daryl Stetler. Glad to be your instructor during this course. So today we're talking about creation, and one of the most powerful evidences of God's existence and His personhood is the design which we see all around us. Today we're going to talk about one of the ways in which that idea is under attack since the writing of Charles Darwin, right? Since the Origin of Species. That book posited a way for creation to exist without God, or for biodiversity to exist without God. However, today I would like to start out by telling you that both evolution and creation are faith propositions. Both evolution and creation are faith propositions. Now, what do I mean by that? It takes some faith to believe either one. Well, the answer is that neither evolution nor creation can be scientifically proven. They cannot be proven by the scientific method. Both creation and evolution are an attempt to explain something that happened in the past. And it's partly a historical issue, not just a scientific one. So the clues that we look back at then, we look back at clues about the origin of the universe. We look back at clues to see which direction do the clues point us toward. And we cannot prove either one of them with 100% scientific certainty. We can't do that. And so I want to point out several clues that I think will help point you in the right direction and that you should use in your apologia and your answer toward those who want to know more about the Christian faith. Some clues about the origin of the universe. Number one is the law of biogenesis. The law of biogenesis. Now, in each of these laws that I'm going to be giving you, I'm going to tell you something that evolutionists, people who believe in evolution, must believe the opposite of what settled science teaches us. All right? In each of these clues, an evolutionist must believe the opposite of what science actually demonstrates. All right? So that's why I say that evolution itself is a faith proposition as well, because you actually have to believe the opposite of things that we observe through the scientific method. Here's the law of biogenesis. Life only comes from life. All right? That's the law of biogenesis. All right? Darwin wrote about this. He wrote in a context when it was literally impossible, when it was possible, to think that life might spontaneously generate. It might be possible. In fact, over 150 years ago, some people believed life could spontaneously generate from non-living matter. One well-known scientist at the time had recipes in his notes of how to spontaneously generate mice from a box of rags left in the corner. All right, you get the idea. So people saw mice appear, and they're like, well, maybe this just came from this non-living matter, right? And they also had how to generate scorpions with bricks and basil left alone for a period of time. So he had notes in his scientific notes, and he was a well-known scientist at the time. So he had these notes suggesting possibly life could spontaneously generate. There was Louis Pasteur actually settled this with a swan neck flask, and he boiled meat broth in this swan neck flask, which would seal off and make it to where nothing could enter and fall into the broth. He boiled it to kill everything in it, and then he demonstrated that once it was boiled, it did not spontaneously generate anything. But when he killed it off and he shut it off where nothing could get to it, no life developed in that. And so there were other scientific experiments that. So we sometimes take that for granted, but the truth is, not that long ago, in Darwin's era, people believed that life could spontaneously generate. And I will just say, we know now that that's not true, that life only comes from life. And so the truth is, evolutionary scientists have to say the opposite of settled science law, something that we've never observed ever anywhere in any laboratory, even under ideal conditions with intelligent input, we have never been able to do any life that did not come from life, ever. So evolutionists have to take it by faith. They have to believe the opposite of settled law. Even though this has never been observed or replicated, they have to believe that at least once life came from non-life. So that's the first clue about the origins of the universe and creation complexity that we see today. Clue number 2, the law of thermodynamics. The law of thermodynamics. The law of thermodynamics says this, 2 things, right? First of all, there is a fixed amount of usable energy and matter, usable matter and energy in the universe, right? In other words, matter and energy cannot create or duplicate itself. It also cannot be completely destroyed. It can be lost, but not completely destroyed. So, law number 1 of thermodynamics is there is a fixed amount of usable matter and energy in the universe. Law number 2 is that energy is becoming more and more unusable. That's what I was just talking about a moment ago. So it is not that when energy is lost to heat, let's say you burn a fire in your fireplace, a lot of the energy goes into heat. And heat is the least recapturable form of energy that we have. So it is lost to heat, and much of it just goes up the chimney out into the atmosphere, and we have no ability to ever recapture that energy in a meaningful way again. So the problem is that evolutionary scientists have to believe things directly contrary to settled scientific laws in this area. They must assert that either energy and matter came from nothing, which is in opposition to the law of thermodynamics, or that energy and matter have always existed, which additionally is in contradiction to the second law, the law number 2 of thermodynamics. Because if you infinitely went backwards into history and matter and energy has always existed, and it's true that energy is becoming more and more unusable, we would have already arrived at the stage where we had no energy to run electricity. We had no energy. We couldn't recapture it. It had all been lost and dissipated to space as heat energy. So they have to contradict settled, observable, scientific law in order to believe that the universe came into existence without God. So again, it's clues, right? It's clues. We're looking and seeing what clues can we examine. So evolutionary scientists have to take that by faith. They have to take by faith something that has never been observed. That is that matter and energy always existed, or that they spontaneously generated. Clue number 3, the fossil record. The fossil record. According to the theory of evolution, we should find many thousands of transitional forms. There should be, if the truth is that birds came from reptiles, we should find a lot of transitional forms. There should be tons of transitional forms. Or if lower plants evolved from into higher plants, we should find lots of transitional forms. The problem is that when we examine the fossil record, we simply don't find them. They don't really exist. Not ones that can clearly be demonstrated to be transitional forms from one to the other. Even though we should have every little segment preserved in the fossil record, there's usually what they claim are transitional forms are enormous leaps between this one and this one, or they have ones that are just barely off the norm and leave a huge gap before we have the other ones that should be the transitional forms. So Darwin called the evolution of plants an abominable mystery in a letter to one of his closest friends, Dr. Joseph Hooker, in 1879. He said, and I'm going to quote from the letter, "The rapid development, as far as we can judge, of all the higher plants within recent geological times," in other words, comparatively in evolutionary timeline, comparatively recent, "is an abominable mystery." So the idea is that we see low plants and then this explosion of higher, more complex plants in recent times with no transition between those two ideas. Just a few months before his death, in August 1881, he wrote another letter to Hooker, and here's what he said. Nothing is more extraordinary in the history of the vegetable kingdom, as it seems to me, than the apparently very sudden or abrupt development of higher plants. I have sometimes speculated whether there did not exist somewhere during the long geologic ages an extremely isolated continent, perhaps near the South Pole. So you get the idea. He's creating things that he cannot see and he cannot find any geologic evidence for because it is necessary to the development of his theory. Do you see the idea that it required this immense act of faith for him to believe in a non-existent, never observable continent where maybe all the evidence for the development of plants is there, right? So in the same way, evolutionary scientists today, it's like, is the mystery still solved 150 years after Darwin? Maybe we've solved the mystery now. Well, let me read to you a recent article from the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. Here's a quote from that article. And is the mystery solved? In short, no. Professor Bugg says 140 years later, the mystery is still unsolved. Of course, we've made lots of progress in our understanding of evolution and our knowledge of the fossil record, but the mystery is still there. We've made lots of new discoveries, lots of checking, lots of archaeological progress, but the mystery of how these plants exploded into being, these higher plants seem to explode into being, is a mystery. Well, here's the thing. I have the answer to the mystery. They did explode into being on a day when God created them, right? We take that by faith. They say, you can't observe that. Well, you can't observe yours either, right? You see that they're both demonstrably faith propositions. Evolutionary scientists will present their charts of supposed evolutionary fossil record, all nicely laid out, right? To pull down their pull-down chart, and here's the lower plants, and they evolved up into these higher. Here's the lower animals, and they evolved up into these ways. But what they don't tell you is that nowhere on Earth do you find the strata, the layers, laid out exactly like that. The charts that they pull down, the charts that they show you on websites or on slides, are a construct. What that means is that often the layers will be out of order, or the layers will be missing. A layer will be missing, and so they have looked at all over the world and interpreted the data by their theory and created the charts. Right? They are a construct. They fit the story that they wish to tell. So, and then they create the charts that shows the story they want to tell. Right? So, evolutionary scientists actually have to say the opposite of scientific evidence here. They have to create a framework that doesn't actually exist in order to contradict a scientifically demonstrable idea of the absence of a fossil record in these areas. Clue number 4. The law of genetics. The law of genetics. Years ago, I told you about my friend Victor that I sat and talked with. And he loved evolution and said Charles Darwin was his hero. And so I sat and talked to Victor, and I said, you can't demonstrate evolution to me. And he said, I'll prove it to you. Here's evolution. Racehorses are faster now than they were 100 years ago. And that's true. You know that? Racehorses are faster now than they were 100 years ago. But here's the thing. The faster racehorses doesn't demonstrate evolution for a couple of different reasons. Genetic breeding, whether dogs or horses, if you're taking notes on your handout, genetic breeding do not reflect an addition of new genetic information. They reflect a loss of genetic information in that breed. In other words, if you are if you're biologically breeding for a particular kind of dog, let's say a Chihuahua, a little small dog, or a Great Dane, great big dogs. What that means is that those dogs' ancestors had the genetic ability to produce both kinds of dogs, very small or very large, based on genetic markers. And now, a successful breeding of a Great Dane and a creating of that dog breed means that they have lost the ability to produce small dogs. Does that make sense? The Chihuahua ancestors could have had the ability to produce very large dogs or medium-sized dogs, but the selective breeding has narrowed the gene pool and they've lost the ability to produce large dogs. Now, if you were able to interbreed those back together again, you would come up with a medium-sized dog that had the genetic ability to go both directions. But selective breeding of faster racehorses means that what has happened is there's been a loss of genetic information so that we more reliably breed faster racehorses. But we don't have the ability to breed slow ones. You get the idea. It's a loss of genetic information. It's actually the same with skin color. And I'll show you a slide right now of a Punnett square. This is a genetic way of examining genetics. And so you see the ABC and the three different letters, and some of them capitalized and some not. Those different genetic markers are the different genetic markers that it takes to make up skin color. And so everything you can see from all small ABCs on the lower right-hand corner make up very light skin. And then you see everything to the capital ABC options that make up very dark skin. And the bottom line is that genetic breeding, a set of middle brown parents could produce everything in both directions. And when it's been a particular race or a particular area has been bred, they've lost the genetic ability to make the opposite end of the spectrum. It's not better, it's a loss of genetic options. And so genetic mutations also cannot add new genetic information. A mutation can make a cow grow an extra leg, but it already has the information to grow legs, right? A cow already has that. A mutation just made it grow an extra one. What it cannot do is genetic mutation cannot make a cow grow a turtle shell because it doesn't have the required information to create that. All right, so human DNA is incredibly complex. I don't know if you know this, but the single-celled amoeba, the amoeba dubia, the lungfish, and the Easter lily actually all have genetic sequences longer and larger than humans. All right, you can check that out if you ever want to look at the facts here. You can Google it. And amoeba genomes are absolutely enormous. Human DNA would have the equivalent of about 3,000 books in our DNA. So every cell has this DNA strand about 6 feet long that is encoded, if you were to unroll it, it is encoded with 3 billion characters, about 3,000 books. However, the base pairs of Amoeba proteus, which is the best known species of amoeba, has a genome that contains 300 million base pairs. All right, Amoeba dubia contains 670 billion base pairs. In other words, we have, and let me show you a picture here of the amoeba, and see it kind of flowing along there through its movement. Isn't that incredible? These are one-celled organisms, and we actually have a genetic code that is smaller than that. The entire world, see that protoplasm flowing and moving? Aren't those incredible creatures that God has made? So what I want to say is that evolutionary scientists actually have to say the opposite of actual science in this area. They have to say that this level of information generated itself, which we do not see evidence of. We do not observe that scientifically. And that it ordered itself. They have to say it generated and ordered itself, and we never see evidence of that. We see evidence of intelligence, like our own intelligence, ordering genetic sequencing, things like CRISPR and things like that are a part of genetic sequencing and making genetically modified organisms. We see intelligence contributing to that, but we do not see spontaneous ordering of information. That's what they have to believe. All right. Continuing on to number 5. Clue number 5 is a young Earth. A young Earth. There are evidences that Earth is a relatively young planet. Okay, there are evidences of that. Let me give you some examples of that. Okay, so rather than the billions and billions of years that evolutionary scientists would claim characterize the planet, there are examples of evidence that points in the opposite direction. For instance, let me give you 3. Soft tissue in dinosaur bones. In 2005, Dr. Mary Schweitzer found red blood cells and hemoglobin in dinosaur bones in Montana. So this scientifically demonstrable fact that red blood cells and hemoglobin, these compounds, these complex compounds, she found them in dinosaur bones. Now, if those dinosaur bones had been millions upon millions of years old, red blood cells and hemoglobin would have never been able to survive. They would have calcified, broken down, and decayed because that's the nature of those tissues. They don't survive. However, when you find them, what's the solution? Well, the answer is that they're not as old as sometimes people have assumed, right? They're not as old as all that. They could survive in a relatively young Earth, and yet without that, if it's millions upon millions of years old, they would have never had a way to survive. I would also say the age and the brightness of the sun, the comparison of the age of the sun and the brightness of it. The Earth should have had an average temperature below freezing billions of years ago. Right? It should have had that average temperature that should have been billions of years ago. There's no scientifically demonstrable way to show that the sun's temperature should have allowed us to have the climate that we have today based on the age and the relative temperature of the sun. So again, scientists have to come up with explanations of that in ways that we don't actually observe. Again, another one is the saltiness of the sea. They attempt to demonstrate that the saltiness of the sea could be solved in some other way. But the truth is, the sea is always getting saltier. And we know this by observing. We know that it is getting demonstrably saltier over the course of time as sediments and minerals continue to flow into the seas from the rivers of the world and the hydrologic cycle. So the problem is that over millions upon millions of years, the ocean would have been to a place where it already was too salty. It was too salty to sustain life. And so these are clues, these are indicators that the Earth very well, it is just as reasonable to look at the Earth and say it actually could be younger than what the evolutionary scientists proclaim. So here's what I'm saying. I'm not saying I can demonstrate or you can demonstrate 100% certain, with 100% certainty, a young Earth and the creation account. What I am saying is that you can demonstrate that both evolution and creation are faith propositions, at least partially. There is scientifically valid evidence for believing in a young Earth that was created by an intelligent designer. There is scientifically demonstrable evidence to believe that there is a God who made all things. And so if that's the case, I would suggest to you that both are faith propositions, and your faith proposition is just as valid as theirs. So that may be something helpful for you if you run into somebody who wonders about all of those things. I would point you to lots of other writing that's out there on this topic in the recent decades. All right? Now, I would encourage you to memorize Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. It is on your handout there together. Let's read, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. And by the seventh day, God had finished the work that he had been doing. And so on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Ah, that's beautiful. Aren't you glad that God created things? He showed his power. He showed his majesty by making all the things that we know and see. And then he sent his Son as part of the creation. And that's where we transition. Again, always in apologetics, always moving toward the gospel. It's not about winning the argument and always proving with 100% certainty that I am correct. It is about demonstrating that there is a reasonable, rational set of beliefs that cohere and hold together, and then moving toward the fact that God entered his creation in the person of his Son, Jesus Christ, and that he came and was part of this creation, the incarnation, the enfleshment of the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, is a marvelous thing that we want to push back toward. All right, so you don't want to stay forever circling the field on creation and evolution. You want to come back to the fact that the God who made all things entered the creation that he made, and that's the amazing thing. The most amazing thing is not that there's a God, not that there's a creation and a designer. The most amazing thing is that the designer entered creation, and that he came to be one of us. And he's a human. He became a human as we are. And he knows what we suffer, and he knows what we are like. He has entered the story himself. And he's pointed the way that he has become like us so that we might become what he is. And that's a marvelous, marvelous idea. So there are many other things that we could converse about. We could talk about how did emotions evolve, such as love? How did higher thinking evolve? How did the process of photosynthesis evolve? Photosynthesis evolve in plants. We could talk about which evolved first, the plants or the insects that live on and pollinate them. Do you see the idea of irreducible complexity there? I would challenge you to think on that. And so there's lots of questions that you could ask about that to kind of help expose the faith proposition that evolutionary scientists must take. But ultimately, it isn't about just demonstrating that they are incorrect. It is about coming back to the gospel of Jesus Christ, that God has entered his creation that he made. God bless you. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you for being with us today.